I never told anyone why I left that day. Not because the reason was dramatic or shameful or even especially complicated. I kept it to myself because it didn't fit into the kind of explanations people expect. It didn't sound noble when spoken aloud, and it didn't sound tragic enough to justify the distance it created. It was quieter than that, almost ordinary. And ordinary truths are the hardest to defend. I am old now. Old enough that people assume my past has been neatly organized, labeled, and put away. Old enough that they think the big decisions are behind me, resolved by time. When people ask about my life, they ask about milestones, work, marriage, children, places lived. They rarely ask about the moments that didn't leave records, the ones that happened entirely inside a person. I grew up learning how to be dependable. It was praised early, that quality. I learned to show up, to finish what I started, to keep my voice even. I learned which parts of myself were useful and which were inconvenient. By the time I reached adulthood, I could move through the world without causing much friction. People trusted me. Employers relied on me. Family leaned on me. Family leaned on me. I wore that trust carefully, like something fragile. From the outside, my life followed a sensible shape. I built routines, honored commitments, learned how to anticipate what was needed before anyone asked. I didn't chase extremes. I didn't believe in sudden changes. I believed that if you stayed long enough, things would settle. That patience was a kind of wisdom. For a long time, that belief carried me. What I didn't understand then was how easily patience can turn into postponement. How quietly a person can disappear while still doing everything right. The day I left didn't announce itself. There was no argument waiting for me, no decision made the night before. I woke up as I always did, earlier than necessary, listening to the familiar sounds of a place I knew well. Everything around me was intact. That was part of the problem. There was nothing visibly wrong to react to. I remember standing still for a moment longer than usual. Not frozen, just delayed. As if my body was asking a question my mind hadn't learned how to phrase yet. For years before that morning, I had been carrying a small, persistent feeling. Not unhappiness exactly, more like a dull pressure. A sense that I was slightly misaligned with my own life. I noticed it in small ways. How tired I felt even after resting, how conversations felt rehearsed, how decisions came too easily because I no longer cared which option I chose. I told myself this was adulthood, that contentment was supposed to be quiet, that wanting more was immature. I had responsibilities. People depended on my steadiness. So I stayed where I was, believing that endurance was the same as commitment. What I never told anyone is that, over time, I stopped recognizing my own reactions. I knew what I was supposed to feel, but the feeling itself was absent. I could describe my life accurately and still feel like I was talking about someone else. That morning, nothing pushed me out. What pulled me was subtler. It was the realization that if I stayed, I would continue to become less present without anyone noticing, including myself. I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because I was beginning not to. That truth felt dangerous. Indifference is harder to explain than anger. Anger invites discussion. Indifference closes doors quietly. I was afraid of what it said about me, afraid of how it would sound if I admitted it out loud. So I said nothing. I chose silence, believing it would cause less damage. I told myself I would explain later, when I had better words, when I understood myself more clearly, when the timing was right. That timing never arrived. The consequences of that choice followed me for decades. Not loudly, not all at once. They showed up in fragments, in moments when I was alone and couldn't distract myself, in the way certain dates still carried weight, in the way I listened carefully when other people spoke about regret, as if they were describing a landscape I knew. I rebuilt a life, or at least the shape of one. New places, new routines, new connections. I learned how to answer questions without lying and without telling the truth. I learned how to keep my past accessible but vague, like a book placed just out of reach. There were times I wondered if leaving had been a mistake, not because the life I left was unbearable, but because it was good enough. There is a particular guilt that comes from walking away from something that isn't broken. I carried that guilt carefully, never setting it down long enough to examine it closely. But there was also something else. A quiet relief I never admitted to anyone. The relief of not having to perform a version of myself that no longer fit. The relief of hearing my own thoughts without immediately correcting them. It wasn't happiness. It was space. As the years passed, I realized that the cost of leaving wasn't just what I lost. It was what I never learned how to share. By keeping the truth to myself, I protected others from confusion, but I also denied them the chance to understand me fully. I became, in some ways, easier to live with and harder to know. Now, at this stage of life, people expect clarity from age. They think time simplifies things. It doesn't. It only makes you more aware of the parts you chose not to speak. I don't regret leaving in the way people imagine regret. I don't wish I had stayed and endured. I also don't believe I was brave. I think I was tired, and tired people make choices that don't fit neatly into stories. What I regret is the silence. Not the act of going, but the absence of explanation. The way I let others fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. The way I let myself become a version of the story that was easier to carry than the truth. I never told anyone why I left that day, because I didn't know how to say that nothing dramatic happened, and everything changed anyway. That sometimes a person leaves not to find something new, but to stop slowly losing what little of themselves they still recognize. I have lived with that knowledge for a long time now. It no longer aches the way it used to. It sits with me, familiar and quiet. And that, finally, feels honest enough.